The rain fell in gentle sheets outside the coffee shop window, as Michael adjusted his worn messenger bag on his shoulder. The familiar scent of freshly ground coffee beans filled the air, mixing with the earthy smell of rain coming through the door each time it opened. It was just another Monday morning, or so he thought. At 28, Michael had settled into his routine as a high school English teacher at Westside Community School. His students often joked that he ran on coffee, and they weren't entirely wrong. This particular coffee shop, the Daily Grind, had become his morning sanctuary before facing rooms full of teenagers with varying levels of enthusiasm for Shakespeare and Steinbeck. The line moved slowly that morning. Michael checked his watch. He still had 20 minutes before first period. Plenty of time. He scrolled through his phone, reviewing notes for the day's lesson on The Great Gatsby. In front of him stood a woman he'd never seen before. She wore simple blue jeans with a small tear at the knee, a plain gray hoodie, and a weathered brown jacket that had clearly seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried a battered laptop bag over one shoulder. "That'll be $5.25, said the barista, a college-aged kid named Tom who knew Michael's order by heart. The woman reached into her pocket and pulled out a blue card. She smiled apologetically as she handed it over. "Sorry, morning brain. I can never remember if this is the right card." Tom ran the card through the machine. The small screen flashed red. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It's declining." The woman's cheeks flushed slightly. "Oh, that's strange. Let me try again." Tom swiped the card a second time. Again, the machine beeped in rejection. "I'm so sorry," she said, now digging through her other pockets. "I must have grabbed the wrong card this morning. Let me see if I have another one." Michael noticed the line behind him growing. A few people shifted impatiently, checking their watches. The woman's movements became more flustered as she searched through her wallet. "Let's try one more time," Tom suggested kindly, taking the card again. After the third decline, the woman's shoulders slumped slightly. "I'm really sorry about this. I'll just skip the coffee today." Something in her expression caught Michael's attention. It wasn't embarrassment exactly, but a flash of genuine disappointment mixed with resignation. Before he could overthink it, he stepped forward. "I've got this one," he said, pulling out his own wallet. Both Tom and the woman turned to look at him with surprise. "Oh, no, you really don't have to do that," the woman protested. Her voice was soft but clear, with a slight accent he couldn't quite place. "It's no trouble," Michael insisted with a smile. "Coffee emergencies are serious business. I'm a teacher. I understand better than most." She hesitated, studying his face as if looking for some hidden motive. Michael simply maintained his friendly smile. "That's really kind," she finally said. "Thank you. No problem. We've all been there with card issues," Michael said, handing his card to Tom. "Add her order to mine." "You're sure?" she asked again. "Absolutely," Michael nodded. "Consider it my good deed for the day." As Tom prepared their drinks, Michael and the woman moved to the pickup counter. The awkwardness that often follows such encounters settled between them. Michael didn't want her to feel uncomfortable, so he kept the conversation light. "I'm Michael, by the way," he said, extending his hand. "Elena," she replied, shaking it firmly. Her hand was small, but her grip was confident. "I really appreciate this, Michael. Not everyone would do that for a stranger. Like I said, no big deal. Just pay it forward sometime," he said with a shrug. "I certainly will," she promised, and something in her tone suggested she meant it. Their drinks arrived, her Americano and his regular dark roast with room for cream. They both reached for the sugar packets at the same time, fingers brushing accidentally. "Sorry," they said in unison, then laughed. As Elena stirred her coffee, Michael noticed her hands. They were well manicured but not flashy, with a simple silver band on her right hand. No wedding ring. For some reason, he made note of this detail. "So you're a teacher?" she asked, replacing the lid on her cup. "Yeah, high school English at Westside," he replied, adding a splash of cream to his own coffee. "Going on 6 years now." "That's admirable work," Elena said. "Shaping young minds. Do you enjoy it?" "Most days," Michael laughed. "Though some days I wonder if they're hearing anything I say about symbolism when they're too busy texting under their desks." Elena laughed, a genuine sound that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "I imagine that's a constant battle. The eternal struggle," Michael agreed. "What about you? Do you work around here?" A curious expression flickered across Elena's face. "I'm in tech," she said simply. Just visiting this part of town for some meetings. Before Michael could ask more, a crack of thunder sounded outside. Elena glanced at the window where the rain had intensified significantly. I should get going, she said, gathering her things. Thank you again for the coffee, Michael. It was unexpectedly nice to meet you. Same here, he replied, wondering why he felt a strange reluctance to see this brief encounter end. Elena paused at the door, looking back at him over her shoulder. I hope your students appreciate their teacher today. And with that, she disappeared into the rainy morning, leaving Michael with the strange feeling that something significant had just happened, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. As he walked to his car, coffee in hand, Michael thought about the woman in the worn jacket. There had been something unusual about her, a quiet confidence beneath the everyday appearance. He wondered if he'd ever see her again, then dismissed the thought. In a city this size, chance encounters rarely repeated themselves. He drove to school with the windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm, not knowing that this simple act of kindness would ripple forward in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. For now it was just a Monday, and he had 30 sophomores waiting to hear about Jay Gatsby's unreachable green light across the bay. 3 days after the coffee shop encounter, Michael straightened his tie in the rearview mirror of his aging Honda Civic. The annual community education fundraiser wasn't exactly his idea of a fun Thursday evening, but as one of the more involved teachers at Westside, he felt obligated to attend. Plus, Principal Wilson had hinted rather strongly that teacher presence would be highly appreciated. The event was being held at the Grand Plaza Hotel downtown, a venue Michael had passed countless times but never actually entered. As he handed his keys to the valet, an expense he'd regret later, he felt distinctly out of place among the luxury cars lined up in the circular drive. Just don't scratch it, he joked to the young valet, who smiled politely at the tired humor. They both knew his 2011 Civic wasn't exactly a prized possession. Inside, the hotel's ballroom had been transformed into an elegant fundraising space. Round tables with crisp white linens dotted the room, each centerpiece more elaborate than Michael's monthly grocery budget. Teachers from various schools in the district huddled together near the appetizer table, creating an island of sensible shoes and department store formal wear amid a sea of designer labels. Michael, you made it, called out Diane, the art teacher from Westside. At 62, she'd seen enough of these events to know exactly how to navigate them. Get yourself a drink. It's free until 8 and the speeches don't start until 7:30. Thanks for the insider info, Michael laughed, accepting a glass of white wine from a passing server. Any idea what we're in for tonight? The usual appeals for funding, Diane sighed. Though I hear they've got some big tech CEO as the keynote this year. Someone who's actually donating rather than just talking about it. Michael nodded, scanning the room out of curiosity. The crowd was the typical mix of local business owners, school administrators, wealthy parents, and politicians looking to be seen supporting education. He recognized the mayor chatting with the superintendent near the stage. As he turned back to Diane, something caught his eye, or rather, someone. Across the room stood a woman in deep conversation with what appeared to be the head of the school board. There was something familiar about her profile, the way she gestured slightly with her right hand as she spoke. Who's that? He asked Diane, trying to sound casual. Diane followed his gaze and raised her eyebrows. That's Elena Rodriguez. She's the CEO of Nexus Innovations. You know, the tech company that's been all over the news lately? They're revolutionizing educational software or something like that. She's tonight's keynote speaker. Michael nearly choked on his wine. Elena Rodriguez? The woman across the room looked nothing like the casually dressed stranger from the coffee shop. This Elena wore a tailored navy blue suit that probably cost more than Michael's monthly salary. Her dark hair was styled in an elegant updo, and even from a distance the confidence she exuded was palpable. She commanded attention without seeming to try, yet the more he looked, the more certain he became. The shape of her face, the animated way she spoke with her hands, the slight tilt of her head as she listened. It was definitely the same woman whose coffee he'd bought just days ago. Do you know her? Diane asked, noticing his stunned expression. I'm not sure, Michael replied honestly. I think I might have met her, but in very different circumstances. Before Diane could press for details, Principal Wilson appeared at Michael's elbow. Michael, glad you could make it. I was just telling Superintendent Hayes about your creative approach to teaching the Odyssey last semester. The podcast project? The parents haven't stopped raving. As Michael was pulled into conversation, he kept glancing toward Elena. What was she doing in that coffee shop, dressed down with a card that didn't work? It made no sense. A woman of her position could afford any coffee she wanted. The evening progressed with the usual rhythm of these events, mingling, followed by a seated dinner, followed by speeches designed to open checkbooks. Michael found himself at a table with other teachers and a couple of local business owners who seemed genuinely interested in education. Still, his attention kept drifting to the head table where Elena sat with the mayor and other VIPs. After dinner, the superintendent approached the podium for introductions. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker this evening. Elena Rodriguez is not just the founder and CEO of Nexus Innovations, one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the country, but also a passionate advocate for educational equity. Her company's learning platforms are currently being used in over 5,000 schools nationwide, bringing cutting-edge resources to students regardless of zip code or socioeconomic status. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Rodriguez. The applause was enthusiastic as Elena took the stage. Up close under the lights, there was no doubt in Michael's mind. This was definitely his coffee shop stranger. Thank you for that kind introduction, Elena began, her voice warm and assured. And thank you all for being here tonight in support of our community's schools and, more importantly, our children. She spoke without notes, moving around the stage with natural ease. Her speech was compelling, about the digital divide, about how technology could either widen or bridge educational gaps depending on how it was implemented, about her own childhood in a household where education was revered but resources were scarce. My mother cleaned houses for a living, Elena said, her voice softening. She couldn't help me with calculus or advanced biology, but she made sure I had a quiet place to study, and believed that education was my pathway forward. Not every child has even that much support. This is why I believe so strongly that we must create systems that work for all children, not just the fortunate ones. As she spoke, her eyes scanned the room, connecting with her audience. When her gaze landed on Michael, he saw the exact moment of recognition flash across her face. It was subtle, just the slightest pause, a barely perceptible widening of her eyes, but it was there. She knew him. Rather than look away, Elena held his gaze for a beat longer than necessary before continuing her speech. Throughout the remainder of her talk, she glanced in his direction several times, as if confirming he was still there. In closing, Elena said, I'm pleased to announce that Nexus Innovations will be donating $1 million to create a technology equity fund for the district, ensuring that every classroom has the tools they need for 21st century learning. The room erupted in applause. $1 million was significantly more than anyone had expected, even from a successful tech CEO. As people rose to their feet in a standing ovation, Michael remained seated, trying to process what was happening. After the speech, people crowded around Elena, everyone wanting a moment with the generous donor. Michael hung back, nursing his second glass of wine, and debating whether to approach her or simply leave. What would he even say? Thanks for the donation, and by the way, why was your card declined for a $6 coffee when you can donate $1 million? He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice someone approaching until a voice spoke beside him. We meet again, Michael. Though under slightly different circumstances this time. He turned to find Elena Rodriguez standing next to him, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. She offered one to him with a smile that was both amused and slightly sheepish. I believe I owe you a drink, she said. Michael stared at the champagne flute, then at Elena, struggling to align the woman in the expensive suit with the one in the worn jacket from the coffee shop. I think I'm a bit confused, he finally said, accepting the glass. The bubbles rose in perfect tiny streams, the champagne probably costing more than his dinner. Elena's smile was genuine, reaching her eyes. That's understandable. Would you mind taking a walk with me? It's getting a bit stuffy in here. She gestured toward the hotel's garden terrace. Michael nodded, curious despite his bewilderment. As they moved through the crowd, he couldn't help but notice how people stepped aside for her, how heads turned in her direction. She acknowledged several with small nods but didn't stop to chat. Outside, the September evening was pleasantly cool. The terrace was beautifully lit with string lights that reflected in the small fountain at its center. A few other guests mingled in small groups, but Elena led him to a quiet corner where 2 chairs sat beneath a flowering trellis. "First," she said as they sat down, "thank you again for the coffee. It was a small gesture to you perhaps, but it meant more than you know." Michael took a sip of his champagne, buying time to gather his thoughts. "I have to ask, why would a CEO who just donated $1 million need a stranger to buy her coffee? Was your card actually declined?" Elena set her glass down on the small table between them. "Yes and no. The card was declined because it was meant to be." She paused, seeming to consider her next words carefully. "What I'm about to tell you might sound strange, but I hope you'll understand." "I'm listening," Michael said. Elena leaned forward slightly. "For the past 6 months, I've been conducting what you might call a personal research project. Once a week, I dress down, leave my usual identifiers behind, and put myself in situations where I might need small acts of kindness from strangers." "You pretend to need help?" Michael's brow furrowed. "Not exactly. I create genuine situations where I could use assistance. A declined card, dropping grocery bags, being short on bus fare. Then I simply observe what happens." Her expression grew more serious. "I don't manipulate or lie beyond the appearance I present. The need is real in the moment, but why? What's the point?" Elena looked out at the garden, gathering her thoughts. "When I was growing up, my mother always told me that you can judge a community by how people treat each other when there's nothing to gain." She turned back to Michael. "As I rose through the ranks in the tech world, I noticed how differently people treated me once I had power, money, and influence. Doors that had been closed suddenly opened. People who wouldn't give me the time of day were suddenly my biggest fans." She took a small sip of her champagne. "It bothered me. I started to wonder, would these same people help me if I were just another person on the street? Would they show kindness if there was nothing in it for them? So I decided to find out." Michael considered this. "That's why you were at that coffee shop? To see if someone would help when your card was declined?" "Yes. I go to different neighborhoods, different types of establishments. I document what happens, how people react." A shadow passed over her face. "Most of the time, people just look away. They pretend not to notice someone in need. It's not malice usually, just discomfort or the bystander effect. Everyone assumes someone else will step up. And how many did? Step up, I mean. In that coffee shop? Just you." Her eyes met his directly. "In 3 days of various small problems around the city, you were the only person who offered help without hesitation." Michael felt a strange mix of pride and sadness at this revelation. "That can't be right. People are generally good." "They are," Elena agreed. "But they're also busy, distracted, sometimes suspicious. Modern life doesn't exactly encourage us to notice each other's struggles." She smiled again. "Which is why your simple act stood out. You didn't just pay for my coffee, you did it without making me feel embarrassed. You treated it as normal, human." The weight of her words settled between them. Michael hadn't thought his actions were anything special, just the decent thing to do. The idea that such a simple gesture was notable enough to remember days later seemed both heartwarming and troubling. "So now what?" he asked. "You've caught your coffee benefactor. Is this where you reveal it was all a test like in those hidden camera shows?" Elena laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "Nothing so dramatic. This isn't a test or a show. It's just me trying to understand something important about human connection." She leaned back in her chair. "Though I will confess seeing you here tonight was a complete coincidence. I had no idea you were a teacher, or that you'd be at this event. Life has a funny way of connecting dots we didn't even know existed," Michael mused. "Indeed it does." Elena studied him for a moment. "Can I ask you something personal, Michael?" "Sure," he replied, curious. "Why did you do it?" "Help me that day? Most people would have just waited for me to step aside so they could order their own coffee." Michael considered the question seriously. "Honestly, there wasn't some noble thought process. You seemed genuinely stuck and helping was easy. I guess I've been in similar situations, we all have, and I know how it feels when no one steps up." He shrugged. "It was just $5.30 of my life to make someone's day a little better." Elena nodded slowly as if his answer confirmed something important. "That's exactly it. The simplicity, the lack of calculation." She reached for her purse, a small, elegant leather bag that probably cost more than Michael's rent, and pulled out a small notebook. I've been documenting these experiences, trying to understand what makes some people stop and help while others walk by. She opened the notebook, revealing pages of neat handwriting. Some patterns have emerged. The people most likely to help aren't necessarily the wealthiest or the ones with the most time. They're often people who've needed help themselves at some point. People who can imagine being in another's shoes. And what are you going to do with this research? Michael asked, genuinely intrigued now. Elena closed the notebook, her expression thoughtful. Initially, it was just for my own understanding, but it's becoming something more. I'm starting to see applications for it in my company's work, how we might build more empathy into our systems, our workplace culture, even our products. She looked directly at him again. The tech world is brilliant at solving technical problems, but we often miss the human element. We build amazing tools that sometimes inadvertently separate people rather than connect them. I'm trying to find ways to change that. Michael found himself nodding. As a teacher, he'd seen firsthand how technology could both unite and divide his students, depending on how it was implemented. That actually makes a lot of sense, he said, though I still find it hard to believe I was the only one who helped in 3 days. You'd be surprised, Elena said, a hint of sadness in her voice. But that's why moments like that coffee shop encounter matter so much. They remind us of our capacity for simple kindness. A comfortable silence fell between them as they sipped their champagne, the garden lights casting gentle shadows. Michael was still processing everything Elena had told him. It was such an unusual project for someone in her position to undertake, yet he could understand the impulse behind it. So, Elena finally said, straightening slightly in her chair, now that you know my secret research project, I'd like to hear more about you, Michael, the English teacher. Tell me about your work. Oh, it's not nearly as interesting as going undercover as a regular person, he joked, but then began talking about his classroom, his students, the challenges and rewards of teaching literature to teenagers in a world of short-form videos and constant distractions. As he spoke, he noticed Elena listening with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about educational challenges he'd mentioned. The conversation flowed easily from education to books they'd both read, to changes in their city over the years. By the time they realized how long they'd been talking, the terrace had emptied of other guests. I should probably head back inside, Elena said, checking her watch. I have a few more hands to shake before I can call it a night. Of course, Michael said, suddenly aware that he'd been monopolizing the time of the event's keynote speaker. Thank you for explaining everything. It's certainly the most interesting conversation I've had at one of these fundraisers. Elena stood smoothing her suit jacket. Thank you for listening, and for not thinking I'm completely eccentric for my little experiment. She paused, seeming to consider something. Actually, I'd like to continue our conversation if you're interested. There's something I'd like to discuss with you. What's that? Michael asked, intrigued. My company is launching an educational initiative that I think might align with your teaching philosophy. Based on our conversation, I believe your perspective would be valuable. Her expression was earnest now, professional but with genuine interest. Would you be willing to hear more about it? Michael blinked in surprise. This evening had already taken so many unexpected turns. What was one more? I'd be happy to, he said. Excellent, Elena replied with a smile. My assistant will contact you next week to arrange a meeting. She extended her hand. It was truly a pleasure to properly meet you, Michael. As they shook hands, Michael felt as though he'd somehow stepped through a door he hadn't even known existed. All because he'd bought a stranger a cup of coffee on a rainy Monday morning. The following Tuesday, Michael was in the middle of explaining the significance of the green light in The Great Gatsby when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it, continuing his lesson, but it buzzed again moments later. Then a third time. When the bell rang and his students filed out for lunch, he finally checked his messages. 3 missed calls from an unknown number, followed by a text. Hello, Mr. Cooper, this is Raj Patel, Elena Rodriguez's executive assistant at Nexus Innovations. Ms. Rodriguez asked me to schedule a meeting with you regarding an educational opportunity. Please call me back at your convenience. Michael stared at the message. Part of him had wondered if his conversation with Elena at the fundraiser had been some kind of dream or misunderstanding. Successful CEOs didn't typically follow up with random teachers they'd met at charity events, even teachers who had once bought them coffee. Yet here was the proof that it had been real. With his free period ahead of him, Michael stepped into the empty faculty lounge and returned the call. Nexus Innovations? Raj Patel speaking, answered a polite, efficient voice. Hi, this is Michael Cooper returning your call. I received your messages about a meeting with Ms. Rodriguez. Ah, Mr. Cooper. Yes, thank you for getting back to me so promptly. Ms. Rodriguez has asked if you would be available to meet her at our downtown office this Friday at 4 p.m. She understands that's after school hours and hopes that might be convenient for you. Friday at 4. Michael mentally checked his calendar. Yes, that should work fine. Excellent. I'll send you the address and parking details. Ms. Rodriguez mentioned you might like to review some materials before the meeting. Would it be all right if I email those to you? Of course, Michael replied, still feeling slightly disoriented by how quickly this was moving. Perfect. And one more thing. Ms. Rodriguez mentioned that this is regarding our new educational technology initiative, but asked that I keep the specific details confidential until your meeting. I hope that's acceptable. Sure, no problem, Michael said, curiosity growing. After giving Raj his email address and ending the call, Michael sat for a moment in the quiet lounge. What exactly was Elena Rodriguez planning, and why did she want his input specifically? By the time Friday arrived, Michael had received and reviewed a substantial packet of materials about Nexus Innovations' current educational software platforms. The company had made impressive inroads into digital learning tools, with programs that adapted to individual student learning styles and provided real-time feedback to teachers. Their approach seemed thoughtful and research-based, not just flashy tech for tech's sake. Still, nothing in the materials explained why Elena wanted to meet with him personally. The Nexus building downtown was everything you'd expect from a successful tech company, all glass and steel, with a minimalist lobby featuring living walls of plants and a reception desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of marble. Michael felt distinctly out of place in his teaching clothes, especially when the receptionist asked for his ID and gave him a visitor badge that felt like it might be equipped with some kind of advanced tracking technology. Mr. Cooper, welcome to Nexus, said a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit approaching with an outstretched hand. I'm Raj. We spoke on the phone. Thank you for coming. Thanks for arranging everything, Michael replied, shaking his hand. Ms. Rodriguez is just wrapping up another meeting. Please follow me. Raj led him through the sleek lobby to an equally sleek elevator, which whisked them up to the 32nd floor silently and swiftly. The doors opened onto a space that was more warm and inviting than the lobby. Still modern, but with comfortable seating areas, art on the walls, and large windows offering spectacular views of the city. Can I get you anything? Water, coffee, tea? Raj asked as he showed Michael to a small meeting room. Coffee would be great, thanks, Michael replied, thinking it fitting given how his connection with Elena had begun. Left alone, Michael looked around the meeting room. One wall was entirely glass overlooking the city. Another held a digital screen currently displaying the Nexus logo. The table was small and round rather than the imposing conference table he'd expected, with just 4 chairs around it. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Elena walked in. Unlike at the fundraiser, she was dressed in dark jeans and a simple navy blazer over a white shirt. Professional but not overly formal. Her hair was pulled back in a low ponytail and she wore minimal jewelry. Michael, thank you so much for coming, she said warmly, extending her hand. I hope the timing wasn't too inconvenient with your teaching schedule. Not at all, he replied, shaking her hand. I'm intrigued by the materials your assistant sent over. You've developed some impressive learning platforms. Elena smiled. We're trying to do something meaningful in the educational space, not just create more screen time for students. She gestured to the chairs. Please sit. Raj should be back with coffee momentarily. As if on cue, Raj entered with a tray holding a coffee carafe, cups, and a small plate of cookies. After setting everything down, he quietly excused himself, closing the door behind him. Elena poured them each a cup. Cream or sugar? Just black is fine, thanks. She handed him a cup, then prepared her own with a splash of cream. So did you get a chance to review all the materials? I did, Michael nodded. Your adaptive learning software is impressive. The way it adjusts to different learning styles is something many of my students could benefit from. I'm glad you think so. Elena took a sip of her coffee, then set it down, her expression becoming more focused. Michael, I asked you here today because Nexus is preparing to launch a major new initiative, and I believe you could play a valuable role in it. Michael raised his eyebrows. Me? I'm just an English teacher. You're not just anything, Elena said firmly. You're an educator with frontline experience and, from what I observed in our conversation at the fundraiser, genuine insight into how students actually learn, not just how we wish they would learn. She reached for a tablet on the table and tapped the screen. The wall display changed to show a sleek presentation titled, Project Lighthouse, Bridging the Digital Divide in Education. For the past year, we've been developing a comprehensive educational technology package specifically designed for underserved schools, Elena explained. Not just hardware and software, but an entire ecosystem of support, training, and implementation strategies. The display shifted to show maps and statistics about educational inequality across the country. The digital divide is widening, not shrinking. Students in affluent districts have access to cutting-edge technologies and the support to use them effectively, while students in lower-income areas often have outdated equipment, inadequate internet access, and minimal tech support. Michael nodded. This wasn't news to him or any teacher who had worked across different districts. What makes Project Lighthouse different is our approach, Elena continued, swiping to the next slide. We're not just dropping off devices and software. We're creating sustainable technology ecosystems with ongoing support, teacher training, and community involvement. And most importantly, we're designing everything with direct input from the people who will actually use it, teachers and students. That's where you come in, she said, looking directly at Michael. I'd like to invite you to join our Educational Advisory Board for Project Lighthouse. We need educators who understand both the possibilities and limitations of technology in real classrooms. People who can tell us when our brilliant engineers are creating solutions that look good in a boardroom, but would never work with 30 real teenagers. Michael blinked, taken aback. Me? On an advisory board for a major tech company? Yes, you, Elena said simply. Our conversation at the fundraiser confirmed what I suspected when you helped me at the coffee shop. You see people as they are, not as abstractions or problems to solve. That's exactly the perspective we need. She leaned forward slightly. This would involve quarterly meetings here at Nexus, plus some virtual sessions throughout the year. We'd compensate you for your time, of course, and any travel expenses. But more importantly, you'd have a real voice in shaping tools that could help thousands of students and teachers. Michael took a moment to process this unexpected offer. I'm honored, truly, but I have to ask, isn't there someone with more experience you could ask? I don't have a PhD in education or a background in technology. Elena smiled. We have plenty of experts and academics already. What we need are practical, thoughtful educators who live the reality of teaching every day. People who understand that technology is only useful if it actually helps real students in real classrooms. She paused, then added more softly, and honestly, I trust your judgment, not just because you helped a stranger with a coffee, but because of how you talked about your students, your approach to teaching. You care about the right things. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. Michael felt a mix of emotions, surprise, pride, and a growing sense of excitement about the possibility. Would I still continue teaching? He asked. I wouldn't want to leave my classroom. Absolutely, Elena assured him. That's crucial, actually. We want working teachers who can immediately see how our ideas would translate to actual classroom use. This would be a supplementary role, not a career change, unless that's something you'd eventually want. Michael nodded slowly, his mind racing with possibilities. This was so far outside his normal experience, yet oddly aligned with conversations he'd had with colleagues about the frustrations of educational technology, designed by people who'd never taught a day in their lives. This is a lot to take in, he admitted. In a good way, but still. I understand completely, Elena replied. I don't expect an answer today. Take some time to think about it. Talk to your principal if you need to arrange time for the quarterly meetings. The first advisory board meeting isn't scheduled until next month. She handed him a folder with additional materials. This contains more specifics about Project Lighthouse, including the compensation details and time commitments. Review it and let me know if you have any questions or concerns. Michael accepted the folder, still feeling slightly dazed. Thank you. I will. Thank you for considering it, Elena said. And regardless of your decision, I'm grateful our paths crossed, both at that coffee shop and at the fundraiser. Sometimes the smallest moments lead to the most interesting possibilities. As Michael left the Nexus building 30 minutes later, folder tucked under his arm, he thought about how a simple act of kindness had somehow led to this unexpected opportunity. He had bought a stranger a coffee, and now that stranger was offering him a chance to help shape educational technology that could impact thousands of students. He hadn't given Elena an answer yet, but in his heart he already knew what it would be. 1 year later, Michael stood at the window of the Nexus Innovation Conference Room, watching the city lights begin to twinkle as dusk settled. Behind him, the advisory board members were gathering their things after a productive quarterly meeting. It was hard to believe that 12 months had passed since he'd first set foot in this building, nervous and uncertain about what he was getting himself into. "Earth to Michael," came a familiar voice. He turned to find Elena approaching, coffee cup in hand. "Deep thoughts?" "Just reflecting," he replied with a smile. "A lot has changed in a year. For the better, I hope?" she asked, coming to stand beside him at the window. "Definitely for the better." It wasn't just polite conversation. The past year had indeed brought remarkable changes to Michael's professional life. After accepting the position on the Project Lighthouse Advisory Board, he'd quickly found his voice among the mix of educators, technologists, and administrators Elena had assembled. At first, Michael had been intimidated by the credentials of his fellow board members, principals from prestigious schools, professors of education from top universities, award-winning teachers with decades of experience. But he soon discovered that his perspective as a current classroom teacher in a regular public school was exactly what Elena had wanted. Practical, grounded insight into how technology actually functioned, or failed to function, in everyday learning environments. The presentation from the West Side pilot program was impressive, Elena said, referring to the data Michael had shared during the meeting. His school had been one of the first to implement the full Project Lighthouse suite of tools with promising results. "Your principal called me personally to rave about the improvements in student engagement. The kids love it," Michael acknowledged. "Especially the collaborative features. I had a group of students who barely spoke in class become absolutely vocal when they could contribute through the digital workspace." "That's exactly what we were hoping for," Elena nodded. "Tools that create new pathways for learning, not just digitize old ones." The past year had seen Project Lighthouse roll out to over 200 schools across the country, with plans to reach 1,000 by the end of the next school year. The initiative provided not just hardware and software, but comprehensive training and ongoing support, elements Michael had insisted were crucial, based on his own frustrating experiences with abandoned technology initiatives. "Have you seen the latest feedback from the rural schools in the program?" Elena asked, sipping her coffee. "Their scores on standardized writing assessments are up nearly 12% since implementation." "I did see that," Michael nodded, "though I'm more impressed by the student survey responses. The increased sense of agency and ownership over their learning, that's the real win." Elena smiled appreciatively. "You always bring us back to what matters most. That's why you're such a valuable voice on this team." As they stood looking out at the city, Michael reflected on how his involvement with Project Lighthouse had transformed his own teaching as well. The insights he'd gained from working with educational technology experts had revitalized his classroom approaches. His students were benefiting from his expanded perspective, and he found himself more energized about teaching than he'd been in years. "Oh, before I forget," Elena said, turning from the window, "I wanted to ask if you've had a chance to review the draft of the teacher training modules. We're incorporating your suggestions about making them more scenario-based rather than feature-focused." "I sent my notes to Raj yesterday," Michael replied. "I think they're getting closer. The video scenarios feel authentic now, not like those terrible training videos we all had to watch in the 90s. Elena laughed. "Progress at last. No more wooden actors saying, 'Gee whiz, this new technology sure is swell.'" Their easy rapport had developed gradually over the past year, through quarterly meetings, video calls, and occasional coffee meetups when their schedules aligned. What had begun as a formal professional relationship had evolved into a genuine friendship based on shared values and mutual respect. "By the way," Elena said, her tone shifting slightly, "there's something else I wanted to discuss with you. Do you have a few minutes before you head out?" Of course, Michael replied, curious. They moved to a small seating area away from the departing board members. Once seated, Elena placed her coffee cup on the table between them. As you know, Project Lighthouse has exceeded our expectations, she began. The data is compelling, but more importantly, the feedback from teachers and students has been overwhelmingly positive. We're making a real difference, Michael nodded, wondering where this was going. Based on this success, the board has approved a significant expansion, Elena continued. We're establishing a dedicated educational division within Nexus, focused exclusively on developing and implementing technology solutions for underserved schools. That's fantastic, Michael said sincerely. It's needed. Yes, it is. Elena leaned forward slightly. And I'd like you to consider taking a leadership role in this new division. Specifically as our Director of Teacher Integration. Michael blinked in surprise. Director of... What exactly would that entail? You'd lead our efforts to ensure that every technology solution we develop is truly teacher-friendly and classroom-ready, Elena explained. You'd work with our design teams from the early stages of development, bring in teachers for feedback sessions, and help shape our implementation strategies. Essentially, you'd be the voice of teachers throughout our entire process, she continued. It would be a full-time position, Michael. I know that's a big ask, considering how dedicated you are to your students. But you have a unique combination of classroom experience and the ability to translate between the worlds of education and technology. That's rare and valuable. Michael sat back, genuinely surprised by the offer. Leave teaching to work for a technology company? It wasn't something he'd ever considered. I'm honored, he said slowly. But I'm a teacher. That's who I am. Elena nodded, understanding in her eyes. I know. And that's precisely why you'd be so valuable in this role. You wouldn't stop being a teacher. You'd be teaching us, and through our work, impacting thousands of classrooms instead of just one. She gave him a moment to process before adding, You don't have to decide now. Take some time to think about it. Talk to your principal, your family. The position would be available whenever you're ready, whether that's next month or next semester. Thank you, Michael said, still processing the unexpected offer. I will definitely think about it. As they wrapped up their conversation and Michael gathered his things to leave, Elena walked with him to the elevator. Regardless of what you decide about the position, she said, I want you to know how much your input has meant to Project Lighthouse. You've helped us create something that actually works for real teachers and real students, not just something that looks good in a promotional video. That means a lot, Michael replied sincerely, though I still think it all seems a bit random, that buying a cup of coffee for a stranger somehow led to all this. Elena smiled. Random, perhaps, but also revealing. That coffee shop moment showed something important about your character, your willingness to help without calculation or expectation. Those same qualities have made you invaluable to this project. As the elevator arrived and Michael stepped in, Elena added, By the way, I never did properly thank you for that coffee. I think you've more than made up for it. Michael laughed as the doors began to close. Back in his apartment that evening, Michael sat on his small balcony thinking about Elena's offer. Leaving the classroom would be a big change, but the opportunity to influence educational technology on a larger scale was compelling. He thought about all the frustrating software and devices he'd been forced to use over the years, designed by people who clearly had never stood in front of 30 teenagers trying to troubleshoot technical problems while maintaining order. Could he help create better tools? Tools that actually made teachers' lives easier rather than adding one more complication? As he considered the possibilities, his phone chimed with a text message. It was from Diane, the art teacher who had first pointed Elena out to him at the fundraiser a year ago. Just heard the news about Project Lighthouse expanding to all the district high schools. Your advisory board is doing amazing work. The art department is thrilled about the digital portfolio system. Drinks to celebrate soon? Michael smiled as he typed his reply. Absolutely. Lots to celebrate and some big decisions to discuss. Whether he took the position at Nexus or remained in his classroom, Michael knew one thing for certain. That rainy Monday morning in the coffee shop had changed the trajectory of his life in ways he never could have imagined. A simple act of kindness offered without expectation had opened doors he hadn't even known existed. He thought about Elena's kindness experiment and how it had connected them. Perhaps there was something important in that idea, that how we treat others when there's nothing to gain does matter, does reveal character, does sometimes lead to unexpected opportunities. As the city lights twinkled below his balcony, Michael reflected on the strange, wonderful journey of the past year. From a declined card and a $6 coffee to a friendship and professional partnership that was transforming education for thousands of students. Life say, most significant changes often begin in the smallest moments. For Michael, it had started with the simple decision to help a stranger in need. For Elena, it had started with the question of whether kindness still existed without the influence of status or wealth. Together, they had found their answer, and so much more. 2 weeks later, Michael accepted the position as Director of Teacher Integration at Nexus Innovations. He finished the semester with his students, explaining that while he was leaving the classroom, he was taking everything they had taught him into a role where he could help make learning better for students everywhere. On his first official day at Nexus, he arrived to find his new office setup complete with a small coffee maker and a handwritten note from Elena. "The coffee's always on me now. Welcome to the next chapter." Michael smiled, remembering the rainy day that had started it all, and got to work.